1. So a little bit of background for me. I'm a fraud investigator at a company who specializes in small businesses and contracting with larger companies in the northern South Carolina and southern North Carolina area. I'm a trained forensic accountant, however. Mostly I investigate arson and/or property damage. Usually the people we're investigating aren't the type for embezzlement or laundering, so my job generally consists of going with another investigator to a burned-down house or business, and nodding and agreeing with everything they say, as I'm not trained for arson. That being said, I spend most of my time doing paperwork in the office as we're in a pretty small area. Though with Hurricane Florence finally wrapping up, I'm sure my workload is going to increase tenfold in the days to come. So one of our main things to make sure that we don't lie or cheat during investigations is that as soon as we open an investigation, we are required to take copious notes and even sometimes record conversations. This is all with a grain of salt, as we're not going to record a woman crying incoherently. However, we just got a new investigator who was only brought in because he was a friend of one of the current partners who set up the group. We'll call him Dean. Only problem was, the other partners who headed the group were not completely convinced that he was the investigator the other partner said he was. So he was under a watchful eye. He was a good guy, and a hell of an accountant, so I liked him, but he also looked up to us for help. Here's where the big bad of the story comes in. We'll call him Mac. Mac had been with the firm for almost 15 years at this point, and saw himself as a bit of a badass. He would never follow rules, harass our female co-workers, and oftentimes come into work drunk. Him and I never worked together, but everyone called him the Private Eye, because that's what he saw himself as. At some point in the summer, Dean, Mac, and I were paired up to investigate a report of embezzlement at a rather large chain in the area. Dean and I drove together, and Mac drove alone. We get to the chain, and we see Mac has already gotten there, and immediately starts yelling at Dean for not taking notes already, as the investigation has started. Dean shies away, and Mac gives me a dirty look, but he knows that I can't be bullied, so he leaves me be. Mac explains to Dean that everything must be recorded, no matter what. Me, feeling bad for Dean, tells him that I'll take all the notes, while Dean can record all the interviews, so on, so forth. We get there and talk to the manager, who was the one who noticed the problem in the first place. And I ask to take a look at the books to see if I can find any discrepancies, so on, so forth. Dean already has his microphone on, and I'm taking notes. When Mac tells me to "Fuck off, cunt. That's my job," I know better than to argue, so I just nod. Dean goes with Mac while I interview the manager, and then talk to a couple of the other workers to take up time. Mac and Dean come back from getting the accounting books, and Dean looks like he's about to break down. We wrap up and leave, and Dean and I get back in the car where he explains he was verbally abused by Mac the entire time. We get back to the partnership, and I ask if Dean had his recorder on the entire time. He said yes. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. The next day I decide to go over the books again with Mac before continuing the investigation. I invite Dean in to see how we do things, so on and so forth, and ask if I should keep on taking notes. Mac says, and I quote, "Yes, everything, so that we can give it all to the partners for review." So, I take notes on everything. Everything. Every word spoke, every hand movement, every comment Mac made to us or anyone else, every number, every page turn, so on, so forth. When we went back to the business, I did the same. By the end of the week, I had a small novel worth of notes, and Dean had enough recordings of voices that he could voice act 7 seasons of a show. All of this included lewd comments, racial slurs, drinking on the job, bragging about stealing cigarettes when he was 13, berating his wife on the phone, telling Dean to suck his dick, telling me to fuck a duck, and so on, so forth. From Mac. We pass the case on to our lawyers and, as a result, have to turn in our notes to the partners. Imagine the surprise on their face when I come in with 76 pages, front and back, of notes, and Dean walks in with a USB stick full of 5 days worth of Mac being a dick. And everyone else being generally pleasant. The conversation was pretty much as follows. "I see you've been taking notes." "Yes, I have. Mac, being the senior member of the group, told us to take notes on everything." "Well, yes, that is our policy. I've never seen this type of output, though." "Well, that USB stick has 5 days worth of conversation, and the papers have the same." "Well, could you give us the minimum we need?" "I think you should go through it all, if not at least read the first couple pages, and listen to a little bit of it. The most important stuff has stars at the top of the page." "All right. Thank you." I left the office and took the weekend off. Come Monday morning, I was called into the business office where the partners were. I was sat down and basically told that while they appreciate my commitment to my job and trying to guide Dean in the right direction, the amount of information we had compiled was unnecessary but eye-opening in how employees were working with one another. They thanked me for the good work but lightly warned me that another note compilation would have more backlash. The next day, I found an email had gone out that employees are to work together in a friendly environment, as well as an empty desk, and a senior investigator position opening. Wherever you are, Mac, I hope you found that private eye job you were looking for. 2. Let me just say I worked in restaurants on and off for a total of about 5 years. I hate restaurant work, so I hope I never have to work in another kitchen. My second job was at a quick-serve burger joint, ran by a corporation for a popular chef. We'll call him Phobby Blay. So Phobby Blay's quick-serve burger joint had just expanded to this mall. I left my first job to work there because the pay was ever so slightly better. The general manager, who we'll just call manager, seemed to be a dunce from the start. Not to insult his intelligence, but I could tell from his interview he was not the brightest bulb on the chandelier. Manager seemed to be a hands-off guy. When he was there, he was in the office with his vape for the day. When he wasn't, the place ran pretty smooth. To the somewhat malicious compliance. We had an issue with the fry oil. The fryolators, too, needed to be cleaned, and the oil tank we had out back was full because the guys that come and empty it did not come the night before. We're prepping for lunch rush and we need to change this oil. It's a Friday and we're most busy during the weekend. Originally, the manager decides we must use this oil because the kitchen manager is not there, who was a great guy. We have to listen to manager. So we heat the oil. Manager comes back out from the office while we continue prepping. Puts the metal cleaner, it's like a webbed spatula to get out any debris that fell into the oil and is sitting in the bottom or floating in the oil. Now, clean oil would be yellow but clear. So, you could see the bottom of the fryolator. Old oil turns very dark brown because you've been cooking in it. We knew before turning on these fryolators that this oil was very old and would be too dark to cook in, resulting in ugly and poor-tasting fries. We warned manager of this before heating the oil. Manager now says, "This oil is really too dark to cook in. We need to think of a way to get clean oil in this." We start brainstorming. We could use one fryolator and use our filtering machine to put one of the fryolator's oil into the other, and just clean and use one for the day until we could dump the old oil. It would slow our times, but would result in happy customers who aren't getting disgusting French fries. Manager doesn't like it. We could let the old oil sit in our filter machine because it could hold the oil, though it would end up being a pain to clear out after. Manager doesn't like that either. We happened to serve quarter-slice kosher dill pickles with the burgers. We had a bunch of empty buckets. Now, with these plastic buckets, they can withstand some heat, but the oil we use is at 425 degrees, and because the oil was already heated to roughly this temperature, we could absolutely not put hot oil into these plastic bins at this time. Manager thought this was a genius idea. Our cooks and I all said no, but Manager is determined. This is the right move. Unfortunately, I am the closest to him. Manager tells me to grab some buckets. I asked him if he was sure, because this would melt the buckets and leave us with a mess all over the floor. Manager is still determined this is the right move. Everyone else steps back and goes back to prep, as manager seems to be tasking me with assisting him. I tell manager I absolutely under no circumstance will be doing this. Manager says, "Fine, I'll empty it. Just get me the buckets." I do so. My co-workers and I look on in amazement as he pours burning hot oil into one of these buckets. I stand close, but far enough that when the plastic starts burning, I'm not stepping in burning hot oil. So manager fills one bucket. No problem. He seems satisfied. "Grab me another," he says. I comply. And he starts to fill bucket 2. A hole around the size of a dollar coin in the US starts to form and lighten in color on the side of bucket 1. The oil is burning a literal hole in the side of the bucket, and before you know it, there is a steady stream of hot oil pouring out onto the kitchen floor. The kitchen staff looks on in bewilderment, and an "I told you so" laugh comes from a couple members. The manager burned his hands trying to clean it up, and I spent the majority of the next 20 minutes helping him clean up. We used all the rags the kitchen had. Needless to say, fries were not good that morning, and were also very slow because he half-emptied one fryer later, rendering it useless for the entirety of the day. Kitchen manager and the kitchen staff all had a laugh about this, and manager had burned hands for a few days, and had to replace his sneakers, the bottoms melted in the oil, all because he was so certain he was correct. 3. In the fast food business, you have two kinds of old ladies. The ones that tip $5 and the ones that rip $5 out of your tip jar when they hear that you don't carry chicken at your restaurant. I recently got to deal with the second one. I work at a restaurant called Jimmy John's, which, if you don't have one, we serve sandwiches with your choice of 6 meats: ham, roast beef, tuna, turkey, capicola, and salami. These also come with your choice of vegetable, but never once have we sold chicken. So anyways, it was late into my second shift working in shop, and we were short-staffed and it had been a long day already, and I was not in the mood to deal with a crabby customer. Sadly, there was a crabby customer who had it coming for me. A privileged old jaunted her way through the door and casually strode up to the registers, and proceeded to look at the menu for at least 5 minutes, letting a decent line build up behind her before she decided to order. After taking her sweet time at the menu, she decided to make up a sandwich using none of the ingredients we had to offer. She requested a chicken unwich lettuce wrap, with olive sprouts and Newman's Own vinaigrette. I then told her we don't carry those ingredients, and the sprouts were a one-time thing that we served a couple of years ago. She snarkily hit me with, "I've ordered this in the past," then explained to me that it was at this exact location yesterday it was ordered. I was baffled as to how any of this was possible, and yet I wanted to provide the best customer service possible and politely told her that we don't carry any of those, and again, the sprouts were only something we carried a couple years ago. To which she responded with a look similar to that of which a cat might give you if you scared or splashed with water, and revolted at the fact that I was telling her no. She demanded to speak with my manager, knowing I had her in a box. Thankfully, I got to mess around with her a little bit, since, as mentioned before, we were short-staffed and my manager had gone out to take a delivery and left me in charge. So I did a quick 180, shouted to the kitchen for the manager to come out to the register, and then did another 180 and spoke softly to her. "Manager present? What seems to be the problem?" To this, it was almost as if I had, instead of spritzing water at a cat with a squirt bottle, had hit her with a whole bucket of water, and she was so hot with rage that it fizzled off with steam. At this point, the line was approaching the door, and I had become worried that customers would start walking out soon. So I assigned a different in-shopper to the register, while I stepped aside to help this lady work out her problem. I was pretty pissed off and didn't care at this point and really just wanted to stick around for the ride. She was blowing off steam from my water bucket I threw at her, and feistily clawed at me with another smart remark.
"Can I speak to the owner?"
As with most restaurants, you aren't supposed to give out the owner's number, so I instead gave her the number of the store, and she bit the bait and called. The phone started ringing, and I quickly spun around to answer it, and I picked up the phone with the usual, "Jimmy Johns, how can we help you?" I was answered with a hiss from the line, and from behind me as she quickly slapped her phone closed and stormed into the kitchen. Usually this behavior is considered threatening, and I could have thrown her out of the restaurant. But she was an old lady, what's the worst she's going to do? She spat out a series of almost incoherent words like it hurt to speak them.
"Take me back to the fridge and show me your chicken, olives, and Newman's own dressing!"
Her face burned bright red when she spoke, and I could smell the smoke pouring out of her nostrils, most likely from a cigarette she had smoked earlier. I was overjoyed that she asked this, though, because I knew we didn't carry any of this and I wanted to see her reaction when she stepped into that back fridge. So I maliciously complied and took her to the back fridge and showed her the chicken and other ingredients that we did not have in our fridge. This was against the rules to let a customer into the back of the kitchen, but again I was having too much fun, and what was the worst she could do? I also stated, "The only chicken we have here is chicken of the sea," just really trying to milk the most rage out of her as I could. I kid you not, as I spoke the words, the thermometer in the fridge rose 10 degrees and glowed a brilliant bright red. She stormed out of the fridge, stormed through the kitchen, shoved through the line, and burst through the back door. And as she left, her final words were,
"Now I understand why only men eat here."
I'll admit they were kind of weak last words for the climax of the story, but I'm just telling it how it happened. I was kind of being an asshole, but was really just enjoying myself messing with this lady, and didn't get to do this very often. This happened in the span of about 5 minutes, but it was 5 minutes of ecstasy, and I would pay anything to be able to relive this. 4. From 2008 to 2016, I used to work for a local manufacturing company, primarily did farm equipment and defense contracts. There was a lot of malicious compliance from the employees because this place was a 300-employee company that was family-owned. So, relation was given priority over skill or experience. This meant a lot of stupid orders, and direction was given to people that had been in this profession longer than some of these folks had been alive. My personal favorite happened to me sometime in 2012. I was a second shift lead in the robotic welding department. My responsibility was to do whatever first shift left for us on a hot list, and to ensure first was set up to run in the morning. As they had more employees than I did, this meant I spent most of my night programming and setting up jobs, because they expected me to watch an 8-man crew, with my head stuck under a table in a 15 by 15 foot robot cell. First shift was notorious for keeping knowledge a secret. A lot of their guys were kept as button pushers. Load the part, push a button. If something went wrong, they called one of 3 people to come fix it. On second, I saw this person as well, so I trained my crew to be less reliant on me. This meant my 8-man crew was outproducing First's 12-man crew. We're a team. I got my list done, and First was able to run without issue right away in the morning. That day, First Shift had programmed some new parts for me. They had set up the job and gave my guy and me the green light to run. Our golden rule in robots is always check your parts. You can make junk in a hurry. My guy fires up the job, and lo and behold, the part is out of spec. Dimensions are off, welds are too small. My guy goes to fix the problem when the first shift lead steps in and says, "I programmed that myself, it's fine. I'm tired of you guys wasting time playing with these robots all night." My guy was a bit gobsmacked and questioned the dimensions of the welds. Lead gets in his face and tells him to stop being so picky and run the parts. They have to ship tomorrow. Pause. The first shift guy has been playing this let's screw second shift over game since I got put in charge. I was actually supposed to have his job, but this guy must do some great brown-nosing, cause he somehow got to keep it. He's very much a work hard, not smart kind of guy. He sits at his desk and googles random shit all day, so much so they took his desk away but didn't discipline him. I told my guys when he's here we play by his rules, but once he leaves, as long as our work is done, I'll take the hit if he has issues with us. Needless to say, a few meetings were had where I had to defend my guys, won every one of those discussions. So first shift guy was getting salty. On pause. First shift lead leaves, and my guy comes up to me and says, "Too fat. These are all messed up." And the first shift lead says, "Run them." I go look at the situation. He had set us up good. The job was so big that my guys would just be able to finish if they ran at rate for all 10 hours. It would also take an hour to step through the program to fix the welding issues. Not to mention the time needed to shim up the fixture to correct the issues. Doing either of these would mean we played around on the robots all night and didn't run production. Parts wouldn't ship, and my guys would be to blame. So I called up first shift guy and told him I misplaced the hot list he left me, and if he could email it to me. I get an email restating the hot list, but because it was an email and this guy wanted to stick it to us, I knew he'd put a stab in there about these hot parts. Sure enough, in writing, "XXX parts on Robot 1 are set up. First piece was done and signed off. All you need to do is run them." So, it's what we did. I knew they wouldn't ship, and I knew that all 300 of them would have to be cut apart and fixed. Our customer would be pissed, and they would need someone to blame. The look on his face when he dragged me into the front office for not following the golden rule, and I just handed the email over, told the plant supervisor I was told they were good to run. I won many battles with him. He won the war eventually. Kinda. I wanted his job something fierce, I was promised it. But I had to take a week off for an emergency medical situation. When I returned, I was promoted to quality. Come to find out, I apparently had a long talk with the first shift lead while I was out and told him I didn't want to be in robots anymore. Joke's on him, though. I had to sign off on all his parts. There were many nights that I may or may not have had time to do that. I've since left. He's still there, finally was demoted. I hear he's still an absolute utter piece of garbage. But he's the best brown-noser I've ever seen. 5. It has been an interesting week. Why? I am a student who works part-time as a pizza delivery driver on a scooter. Now, I don't work for the restaurant directly, but I work for a contractor, a great boss who pays me on time and is very forgiving, plus an all-round good guy, who employs a bunch of scooter drivers at various restaurants around one of the major cities in the world. And since he's a great guy to work for, I usually eat whatever shit the restaurant workers throw my way with a smile because I don't want to complicate things for him with the restaurant. Enter Dum Dum. There's this idiot who works at the register who I have went out of my way to help in the past, when shutting down the restaurant at the end of a shift. It is known to pretty much everyone that we have exams coming up, and we all need time to study after work, and my shift ends at 10:30 p.m. So the restaurant is about to shut down for the day, and we hear a device beep at 10:29. If Dum Dum accepts the order, I have a 30-minute ride to the location, and then another 30-minute drive to get back to the garage, plus another 15-minute walk to my room. I tell this person that I won't be getting paid for the extra work by my boss, and politely ask this person to talk to the restaurant manager to make sure I get paid for the extra hour of work. And then Dum Dum decided to yell at me.
You don't work for the restaurant. You don't work for the manager. Talk to your boss if you want to get paid.
Let's back up. A couple of days before this idiot yelled at me, Dum Dum has stopped using the words please or thank you, and started giving me orders instead of requests like she used to. And it started getting on my nerves. So after she was done yelling and I had stared at this person in anger, I said, "Okay," and finished my delivery, went back home and fell asleep, after working an extra hour for free, and I was fucking pissed. The very next day I took an order at 10 p.m. It required me to go to like the Bay Area of the city near a harbor. And this place had a lot of confusing flyovers and bridges, and if you made one wrong turn, you were looking to add an extra 30 minutes to your trip. As fate would have it, I was supposed to slide left under a bridge to stick to the streets, but I misread the instructions on Google Maps and took an expressway that took me to another part of the city. My first ever routing mistake while on the job. I was irritated for a few minutes, but then began laughing out loud like a maniac while driving when I looked at the time. 10:30 p.m. As soon as I could find a spot to park, I called the boss and told him I was at another part of the city, and that it would take me another 45 minutes to finish my delivery and get back to the restaurant. And Dum the cashier couldn't leave until I returned all the money I had collected to the register during my shift. And that's when I decided to become the most cautious driver in the world, obeying all the rules of the road that sometimes you treat like guidelines. So anyway, the delivery was eventually done, and I began the trip back to the restaurant, and I started getting calls.
The pizza was too cold and ruined. You're gonna have to take another pizza back to the same address.
And then a call from the boss. I'll handle it, just go back, give them the money, and then go home. I returned to the shop at 11:45 p.m., and Dum was the only one left, and goddamn was this pissant fucking pissed.
Why are you so late? My shift ended 45 minutes ago.
And considering how shitty the place was with paying people, I knew that Dum wasn't getting paid an extra cent after the shift. And I made sure that I spoke softly when I replied. It's like you said. I don't work for the restaurant. I don't work for you. Talk to my boss if you have any complaints. 6. This story happened quite some time ago. I have never tried to seek out revenge before, but the way these people treated me and my family was utterly repulsive. And so here we have my first ever and hopefully last revenge story. First, the setup. My family lived in a house that was owned by, according to one of my family members, let's call her Mary, benevolent landlords. After they had lived there for 2 years on lease, the lease expired, and so they started living there on a month-to-month basis. Mary's husband, let's call him John, suggested that they renew their lease, but Mary, being convinced that they had established a relationship of trust with the landlords, insisted that there was no need to do so. This was the first mistake. Sometime later there was a storm that knocked over a relatively flimsy and frankly hideous chain-link fence that was built around the house. Now, because Mary and John kept important things in their yard, they needed a fence. The landlords were looking around for contractors to rebuild the fence, but John had an idea that he felt would be beneficial for all. See, John and Mary really loved this house, and they were hoping someday to buy it off the landlords, something that the landlords had suggested as a possibility from time to time. John suggested that he build the fence instead. He would only charge for the materials required, and he would provide the labor at no cost under one important condition. The landlords must promise that they had no intention of selling the house. One landlord, we'll call him Benny, not only promised John that the house wouldn't be sold anytime soon, but even went as far as saying that they would only ever consider selling the house to John and Mary, and so a deal was made. John would rebuild the fence, more beautiful than it had ever been, and Benny and the other landlord would ensure that John and Mary would get to keep living in that house, enjoying the fruits of their labor until the day the landlords finally decided to sell the house to them. John and Benny agreed upon what the dimensions and material of the fence would be. They decided wood, and they decided on the fence being fairly tall. John bought the materials and Benny paid John for the expenses. Halfway through building the fence, John asked Benny about whether he wanted certain changes in the backyard that would, alongside the fence, only serve to make the land value skyrocket. Benny said he would love said changes. The next part is important. John looked Benny in the eye and said, in no unclear terms, "If you have any intention of selling this house to someone other than us, tell me now and I will stop this entire project. I am only interested in building this under the condition that I will get to enjoy it." Benny responded, equally clearly, "You and your family will get to enjoy this home indefinitely. Feel at ease to do whatever you want with this yard." And so the fence was finished, and it was beautiful. This is the part where I come in. I came to visit my family, and I helped them finish the fence and clean up the yard. I wasn't particularly happy with the terms of this agreement, but there was nothing that could be done now. Now here comes the part where my family gets fucked. Hard. Not so much as a week after the fence had been built. Mary gets a call from the other landlord, let's call her Jane. Jane tells Mary that something unexpected has occurred. See, her niece is currently on the market for a house, and she really wanted to see this particular house. Mary, who can feel herself getting riled, asks Jane how this could be. The fence was only just finished, and they're considering selling the house. Jane assures Mary that her niece will most likely not want the house, but that she has to let her see it. Very well. Now, I am not sure about the details that happened shortly after, but it seems that Jane's niece didn't like the given price of the house, which was now more valuable than it was before, and so she chose not to buy. Bullet dodged, right? If only. Benny came to visit John and Mary with something they had always wanted. Suddenly, the landlords wanted to sell, and an offer was made to my family. Now, my family is not wealthy, but they would have preferred to have been told well in advance of the intention to sell. Nonetheless, the offer that was presented was not unfair, and the family said yes. Excellent. Yet, as soon as my family was approved to purchase the house, Benny came back with a change. The landlords no longer wanted to sell the house at the original price. Instead, the price they had in mind now skyrocketed to roughly the same price as the most expensive house in the area, a price John and Mary could no longer afford, and certainly more than the house was actually worth. That's not the worst of it, though. Suddenly, the landlords needed to sell the house immediately. John said to Benny, "We had a deal." Benny responded that they suddenly needed the money because of some family member needs. Later on, the story changed to them no longer needing the money. Then it was Jane who needed the money because of some other piece of completely fabricated bullshit. The point was that they wanted to sell the house now to line their pockets, but they could never stick to a single excuse. Again, John told Benny that they had a deal. Benny's response, "I don't remember that. We never got anything in writing, and so we never had any deal." Jane later told me, "A verbal agreement doesn't mean shit." Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, nothing could be proven. We couldn't force them to sell the house to my family at the original price, and we couldn't force them to let my family keep living there. All right, thought my family. We just want to get paid for the labor that we put into the fence then. This was not ideal, since they now needed to leave the home they had lived in for quite some time. But they knew it wasn't theirs, and they weren't going to put up a fight over it. At this point, they just wanted to get paid for their labor. Benny and Jane didn't want to pay. My family members needed that money, given that they were getting kicked out on such short notice. The money was needed in order to find a new place to live. Benny and Jane, however, insisted that they had always been fair with the rent, and that they simply didn't owe my family legally. I told Benny and Jane that we would just take things to court and have a judge decide. Given the fear of court, Benny and Jane decided that they would pay my family, but that the labor for this gargantuan monstrosity of a beautiful fence just wasn't worth much more than the materials it was made of. The labor couldn't possibly be that much, they reasoned. Also, they would only pay for the labor for the fence, not for the rest of the work that was done on the yard. Well, everyone decided to get an estimate. The average we got was $3,000 for the labor. Benny and Jane managed to get one estimate from one of their family members at $350. What a fucking joke. The day to leave arrived, and Benny and Jane paid my family far less than what the labor was actually worth. My family left. We lost so much. The effort that went into building this fence, with the intention of getting to enjoy having it, under the agreement that they would get to keep living there, just to have it taken away, and to barely even get paid for the labor, to get shit on by these two fuckwads. That was unacceptable to me. We couldn't win anymore, and I didn't want them to win either. So the revenge. I read up on fences. I learned far too much about what was and wasn't allowed when it came to fences. I memorized every rule. I learned when permits were and were not needed. I learned what the allowed dimensions were. I learned about whether fences needed finish. Oh boy, the things I learned about fences. I learned that you don't need a permit if your fence gets damaged, so long as you're rebuilding the exact same fence. But this was wood and the old one was chain link. I learned that the fence needed to be painted, but this one was not. I learned that the fence had a very specific height limit, which this fence violated. These people were so happy to stick to the letter of the law when it came to screwing over my family, so I decided that I, too, would stick to the letter of the law. Somehow, the county found out that this fence was permitless, unpainted, and far too tall. Shortly after the county found this out, Benny and Jane got a visit from the county right before they managed to sell the house at their obscene price. Wouldn't you know it? Their fence was built illegally. Now, sometimes you can just get a permit after the fact, but their fence wasn't allowed to be built the way it was. There were no plans, no inspection, nor anything else that the county required. It had to come down. My family got an angry call. The landlords accused my family of never getting a permit, something that my family literally could not do given that this was not their property. Besides, it was the landlords who assumed no permit was needed, and my family knew nothing about how permits worked. So the fence had to be torn down. There goes the money they saved by not paying my family. And they lost their prospective buyer. There goes the money they wanted to make. And the land value of the house went down. There goes the price point they wanted to sell the house at. And they need to build a new fence, since no one will want to live in this house without some sort of fencing. Looks like they'll need to pay for a new fence, labor and all, from an actual contractor. We didn't win, but neither did they. Fuck you. 7. Trigger warning for anyone offended by crimes against potatoes, cheese, and cuisine in general. I have since attempted to atone for my sins by never treating food this poorly again. With that out of the way. Over a decade ago, I worked in a small independent pizzeria in the rural Midwest USA, as both a cook and nominally an assistant manager, which seemed to imply I had authority to bear the brunt of customer complaints, while also lacking the authority to do much about them, other than call for an actual manager. Even so, it was a pretty nice job, in no small part due to the fact that being a non-chain restaurant in a small town in the Corn Belt, most of our clientele was fairly nice and civil, or near insensate from being high on moonshine or some other recreational pharmaceutical after some hoedown or shindig, or both, since I've found the Venn diagram of chill folks and folks who are likely intoxicated by cannabis to contain not insignificant overlap. Now for a little background. This episode, I am to relate, took place during these Hassalon days when the Atkins diet was at its zenith. For those sane people outside the US or otherwise sheltered from it in a different manner, the Atkins diet was ostensibly a health plan to assist with weight loss by cutting out carbohydrates from one's diet. In reality, many, perhaps most of its practitioners, labored under the pretense that despite incredible intakes of high-fat and high-calorie foods, the avoidance of bread would somehow cause Mother Nature and her sons heart disease and malnutrition to go blind and forget about them for a while. Another point to note is that unlike some pizzerias, our pizza place served much more than just pizzas. Though pizza was the primary product on offer, we had a bunch of different sandwiches, steak, chicken, fish, etc., calzones, wings, various homemade breads, and French fries and other fried foods. With the onset of Atkins, our menu morphed to include such idiocies as breadless sandwiches, breadless pizzas, etc., which are too depressing to describe in detail. At the time of this incident, I had been working there for about a year and a half. It was a Friday, specifically the Friday after Thanksgiving. For non-USers or those not in the know, Thanksgiving is our pagan ritual where we offer sacrifices of food to the gods of gluttony and annoying relatives. Normally Fridays were rather busy, but because of the fact that every family had somewhere between a lot and infinite leftovers in their fridge from the day before, the restaurant was as dead as my sense of happiness after hearing Paul Reiser do stand-up one time. As such, I was the only one scheduled to work for the last 2 hours of the shift until closing. Much cleaning was done to fill the hours until midnight. when I could go home and play video games until sunrise like any self-respecting young person. Grease and dirt still sing mournful ballads of the terrible reckoning of that night. Anyway, having scrubbed the place to a shine, counted the till, and beat back the throng of customer, I found myself staring daggers at the seemingly time-locked punch clock with 15 minutes to go until midnight. I hate the jingle of bells on entrance doors to this day. In walked the couple, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. H for this story. Their actual last name began with H. They shared their surname with that of a portion of the name of a well-known band of motorcycle. But I also had to have some other less than flattering nicknames utilizing the letter for them. Or at least for one of them. Mr. H was cool. He was this chill little scrawny guy who wore glasses roughly the thickness of a phone book folded twice, and was incredibly soft-spoken and polite. His one damning quality was a peculiar reluctance to wear anything but a thin and very nipple-revealing sleep shirt and boxer combo into the restaurant, despite whatever condition may pertain outside. Mrs. H, on the other hand, was a beast of a specimen. In many senses of the word, she was quite, robust in her stature and physique, towering over me, a not short guy, by at least a foot, 1/3 meter for the fancy metric inclined, and easily outstripping me in weight by somewhere around 200 pounds. I'm too lazy to look up the pound-to-kilo conversion, sorry. Lest this seem like simple body shaming, I should note that her lack of social grace was every bit commensurate to her size. She was rude, brusque, demanding, and generally unpleasant, in the way of all customers who come into a restaurant with the revealed, epiphanic knowledge that they are right, and by extension, the rest of the world is wrong.
5 cheese fries,
she said, spewing the words like a Victorian noble when telling a servant to clean up a dog's mess.
extra cheese.
The door had barely had time to close behind her. "Yes, ma'am," I said, wincing inwardly but hopeful to keep the interaction brief so I could usher them on their way. "And would you like—"
And make sure it's extra cheese this time. You duty heads never put on enough cheese."
I should mention here that she did not say the word duty heads, nor in fact any such mild swear replacement at any time. She had a habit that our manager called swear Tourette's, where her speech would be strangely punctuated by a wealth of rather inventive curse words, peppered throughout at about every third word, emerging from her uncouth throat hole. The behavior was tolerated and she wasn't banned from the restaurant because, though uncivil and rude, it did not come across as designedly hostile or attacking, since there was no non-hostile behavior she had to compare it against. It was her rest state, as it were, a background radiation and unpleasant aspect of her existence. The way tornadoes cause property destruction or Paul Reiser causes sadness. Also, everyone felt bad for her husband, who we knew would be deprived of our food as well if we banned her. And as I mentioned, he was rather chill and cool, nipple shirt notwithstanding. "Yes, ma'am," I said, and knowing the order had only been for her, "And anything for you, Mr. H?"
"No, thank you," he said, "though I may get a soda before we—"
And make sure not to put any of that toasted breadcrumb shit paste on it.
Note, she actually said shit paste, and though I loathe repeating too much unwholesome language here, I feel this one is novel enough to warrant it. She interrupted,
"Where on Atkins?"
This confused me for several reasons. First, while I was perfectly capable of making up breadcrumbs to put on whatever a customer desired, we didn't have them as a normal part of our cheese fries recipe. Secondly, to the best of my knowledge, then and now, French fries are not carb-free, thus casting doubt on the soundness of using them as a weight loss tool. Ma'am," I said, searching my mental vaults for a way to say it that didn't make it sound like she was stupid. "You know that potatoes and French fries do contain carbs, right? If you're doing Atkins, we have a lot of other items that—"
"Look!"
Creative expletive.
"Just make the damn fries. I think I know more about healthy diet than you do."
It is my misfortune to have missed such an obvious truth, I suppose, and, as they say, the customer is always right. I obediently went to turn on the fryer, which I had turned off in my foolish assumption that no one would order 5 cheese fries, less than 10 minutes before midnight the day after a major holiday, and put the fries on to cook. A substantial and overtime-inducing amount of time later, I loaded the French fries into a baking dish and proceeded to cover them with roughly double the amount of cheese as was normally served on them, and about 8 times the amount a human person should have in a whole week. When finished, I packaged them up and went to give them to Mrs. H.
Let me see 'em before we go. Make sure you put on enough cheese,
she said. I obligingly opened up one of the containers, and even more obligingly opened up the remaining 4 when she didn't trust that they would be equivalent to the already inspected one.
Not enough cheese, she said. Go and do 'em again.
At this point I had reached that nirvanic state where annoyance crossed the threshold and became an almost beatific equanimity, bolstered by the malicious understanding that my obedience completely undermined her fruitless and stupid diet. I went and did 'em again, this time piling on roughly 3 times the cheese I had used previously, resulting in a soupy mess of liquid cholesterol that would have instantly made every cardiologist in the world die from depression. Another inspection followed. The results were declared satisfactory, and the H's left without further ado, leaving me free to close up shop for good. I didn't know it then, but over the next few weeks the cheese fries order was to be placed several times per week by her, in the invincible ignorance of belief that it was Atkins approved. Several more weeks after that, after a time when the H's had failed to order anything from us, I was working alone again one night, when to my surprise in came Mr. H unencumbered by his wife. What's more, he came in to order just a baked fish platter, one of our healthiest menu items, and quite good for himself. When I asked him where his wife was, he informed me that she was no longer able to eat out for the foreseeable future. As it turns out, French fries were not carb-friendly. Furthermore, she had actually gained somewhere on the order of 25 pounds during her diet, and had a minor cardiac episode, and was restricted by her doctor from eating anything more unhealthy than raw vegetables and air for a long while. When she finally did come back in, much later, and many pounds lighter, I was even astounded to find that she thanked me after listening fully, intently, to my alternative suggestions for healthier menu items. Addressing some common questions and comments. 1. Our breadless sandwiches and pizzas were these sad little shells of foodstuffs, where the bread layer was a mixture of green vegetables and some sort of dairy substitute thing that had only heard of cows in myth and legend. The resulting glop was baked until it was a crispy patty loaf hybrid or pizza round, and then covered with sandwich and pizza toppings in an attempt to make it taste a little less like ass. This attempt was always unsuccessful. 2. I've had no personal interactions with Mr. Reiser. I just find him unfunny for the perfectly legitimate reason that he is to comedy what the Black Death is to human health and well-being. In some more malicious alternate reality, the despotic military state that has taken over the US has replaced waterboarding and thumbscrews with copies of Couplehood and Mad About You DVDs. 8. Some background information. Back when I was in high school, I took a standard physics class from a teacher, physics dick or PT, who liked to push his power around. This resulted in a lot of ridiculous rules. My favorite was the rule that a student had to spend at least 1 minute on each question in a test. If we turned a 40-question test in 39 minutes after PD handed it out, we'd be docked 20%. The policy was supposed to encourage us to be careful with our answers or some shit, but it frustrated me to no end. I had a pretty good mind for physics, so I always finished my test fairly quickly. I had to stare at a wall for 20+ minutes before I could turn my test in and bring out a book to read. Not a huge deal, but still annoying. Now, PD was not a great teacher, so the class usually had a lot of questions. One day, as we were reviewing for the year-end standardized test, he was trying to explain one of the review questions to the class. Without getting too deep into the semantics, he put the equation F equals ma on the board twice, and tried to convince us we would get 2 different answers using the same quantities for the variables, if we solved it in different orders. Naturally, I pushed back on this. After a few minutes of discussion, PD said in front of everybody,
You obviously don't understand physics as much as you think you do. I want you to start coming into the remedial sessions every Wednesday so I can fix that.
So, fuck that guy. I, the never skipped a class, goody two-shoes, people-pleasing human rug, stood up so fast my chair fell over and stormed out of the classroom. I didn't even have a hall pass, bless my soul. As I sobbed in a stall in the girls' bathroom, I hatched my plan for revenge. PD had a grading incentive for the year-end standardized test. If we scored above 85% and had no zeros on our assignments, we would get an A in the class. So it didn't matter if we were failing if we met both these criteria. He would kick us up to an A. A few days after the incident, I checked with PD to make sure 100% that I could qualify for the grade boost.
As long as you turn everything in, I don't care what's on your assignment. It's quantity I'm worried about, not quality.
Sweet. For the rest of the term, I wrote my name carefully across the top of each of my assignments, worth 1 point, and turned them in blank. The first time I handed PD my paper, he looked at me with pure and unadulterated confusion. With a classic shit-eating grin, I said, "Quantity, not quality, right?" And I was right. He had to give me that 1 point for each assignment. Since he had also mandated that I attend his remedial sessions, I'd waltz in, write my name on the roll, and waltz right back out again. Test time came. PD was stressing over my lack of physics understanding, and tried with increasing panic to get me to do one assignment, or sit through just one review session. Nah, I knew my way around the subject matter already. I just sat in the back of the class and let him think I was an idiot. We walked into the computer lab for our standardized test, and PD snarked, "Good luck, you're going to need it." This was a 60-question test, which meant we had to take at least an hour doing it. For the first 10 minutes, I stared at the opening screen. PD walks by, I can feel his concern. 10 more minutes, he walks by again.
"Is everything all right?"
PD asks, "Just peachy." 45 minutes in, I could practically hear him sweating. He kept shooting me furtive looks from across the testing room. I clicked past the opening screen and got started on my test. 20 minutes later, I submit my answers and walk out of the room. I knew I aced that thing. For the next couple weeks, PD and I pointedly ignore each other. I keep checking my grade. One day, I see the F had switched to an A. He had gotten our grades back from the state, and apparently I had met his score cutoff. Naturally, I go to see him. "Hey, PD, I noticed you got the test scores back. How'd I do?"
"Well, you passed."
"Sweet. What did my score end up being?"
98%.
"Awesome. Where did that rank me?"
"Highest out of my classes."
"Wow. All those remedial sessions sure did pay off. Thank you." 9. At my work, I get orders from customer service, and I pack them up and ship them out. One of the products can be personalized by the customer. The software I use is designed so that I upload a file with the list of names to be printed. It can only be formatted one specific way, otherwise it just rejects the file. I receive the file via email from customer service. They get the names from a report received via the online website. When I was trained, I was told I should not edit or change the file I receive. Just use it exactly as it is. If it fails, then I was supposed to email it back to customer service and tell them it didn't work. So for a while I did that. But after one order took multiple attempts over the course of 2 weeks, emailing customer service again and again, "The file still doesn't work, please fix." I opened the file myself and took a look. Turned out it was a super simple fix. Customer service was consistently doing one of two mistakes. They were either emailing me the file they received from the website, completely wrong list format, or they were screwing up the completely simple task of copy-pasting the names into the right list format. So after that, I just started opening the files and fixing them myself. I would also email customer service to let them know I was fixing their mistakes. Usually just a screenshot of the original file versus the fixed file. I had hoped they would eventually remember my examples and stop making the same mistakes over and over. Nope. Instead, some weeks later, my boss pulled me aside and told me that there were a few complaints that my tone was coming across as rude or snippy in my emails, and I could maybe try being a bit nicer. Also, the orders were taking too long. Could I explain why? Well, that made me pretty miffed. Since I had started fixing the errors myself, the fulfillment time went from 2 weeks to 2 to 3 days at most. My boss is awesome though, so she listened when I explained what I was supposed to do, versus what I had been doing, and showed her my emails. My boss then emailed the website manager and asked if the order file could be changed slightly to just match the format I needed to process the order. It seemed like a simple solution, so customer service wouldn't have to copy-paste the information into a second file. It was just a list of names. The report program's formatting could be changed if needed. The website manager huffed and grumped about it and clearly didn't want to bother with taking the time to make changes. They snidely insisted it was easier and faster if everyone would just do their jobs correctly to start with. Here's where the malicious compliance begins. My boss didn't have the pull to override the website manager, so she advised me to go back to doing it the way I was supposed to. Report every single failed file and do not fix it. She also told me to CC the website manager each time, since it was part of their department too. Last of all, dial up the sweetness in my emails. For about 1 week, customer service faithfully sent me the correct files. But then they started to drift again. When the first wrong file came in, I CC'd the manager and they completely fired back a screenshot and an irate reminder to everyone about the right file. The next one got a similar reaction. The third email got no response, nor any after that. In the silence that followed, the floodgates slowly creaked open, until almost every file from customer service had a problem with it again. Every email was faithfully CC'd to the website manager, with a screenshot of the failed file. Every fixed file that failed was also CC'd to website manager, with another screenshot of the file. It soon piled up to a dozen emails a week, and some orders took 2 weeks to fill. Every email started with a hearty greeting and ended with a sincere thanks, and a wish for a happy, good and great day, afternoon, weekend, holiday, etc. I oozed pleasantness in every sentence. 3 months later, the process for personalized orders was suddenly and completely changed overnight. Apparently the website manager got fed up and had my program changed so that it pulled the list of names from the website directly. Amusingly enough, it was very easy to implement. According to the IT guy that came by to show me the new changes, what had been a week-long process became something I could do in about 15 minutes. 10. I will preface this by saying that a couple years ago I worked for a medium-sized business in the US. About 40-plus locations and wireless retail across one state. Not small enough to be small, but small enough to know the owner and having met him on a few occasions. I was one of the store managers for one of the retail locations. We recently got a new district manager, DM, who was an absolute tool. No people skills, no product knowledge, no sales skills. Basically, he got fired from another gig but had known the owner a long time, so he got the job. He frequently demanded employees do things outside the scope of their job, sometimes totally illegal, and clearly had no knowledge of state's labor laws despite being a district and region manager for the last 10 years or so. For these reasons, I ignored all of his calls to my cell and pretended like in-person conversations didn't happen. Store calls were recorded, but most of our communication was through text. About 2 months or so into his new position, he decides to institute a new rule that if any store doesn't hit its daily sales goals, regardless of how the month looks, they have to be on the 30-minute sales call the following morning at 8 a.m., even for employees that had the day off. For reference, our stores were open 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. When this rolled out, I reached out to him, all via text, explaining to him the labor burdens this would place on the store. 1, we were not issued company cell phones, so they could not legally require us to use them for business, especially when not working. So anyone who had the day off could legally avoid responding after our closing hours and sleep in past the call. Also, none of us were classified as on-call employees, so that's an accountability issue. 2, if an employee chose, since we are not obligated to use personal phones for work, they could simply choose to use the phone at the workplace. This is fine. But my state laws prohibit requiring breaks over 1 hour during shifts without employee consent. So a closer coming in at 10:30 could show up at 8 a.m. for the call and work until close. And now we have 2.5 hours of overtime per day per closing employee. 3. State law requires 2 hours paid labor for any forced, without employee consent, schedule changes not made at least 24 hours in advance. 4. State law requires that you pay any employee who shows up to work, no matter how long, unless they leave sick, etc., be paid for at least 2 hours of labor or half a day's normal shift, whichever is greater, 4 hours. The one exception is critical business meetings scheduled well in advance, 30 plus days. So if you are off, you could come in for a 30-minute sales call and get paid for 6 hours of work, unless you had a month's notice. I disclosed all of this to my new DM and told him I am legally obligated to inform my employees of their rights, and to ensure they get paid what they are entitled to. Please rethink this punishment, because you will bury this store in labor costs if you enforce this. His response was, "Whatever it takes, you've been given your directions. Anyone not on the calls when they're supposed to be will be written up." Okay. Well, after 4 weeks of this, we got paid weekly. Nobody, including myself, got paid any of the labor surcharges we were owed. I reached out to the DM and asked him about it via text. "What? Everything you said is nonsense. Do as you're told. You get paid what the timesheet says. That's it." Okay. Obviously, my staff is pissed for not getting paid for unapproved overtime, and for being required to come in on their day off for 30 minutes on late notice, and not getting paid what they are owed. So I sent an email to my director of sales, and I CC the owner of the company. I briefly disclose the new policy and discuss its ramifications, and attach screenshots of the text messages including discussions with my DM, including whatever it takes, and his most recent one saying, "You get paid for what the timesheet says, that's it." I basically ended it with, "I am really hoping we can resolve this soon. If anyone reports this to the Labor Commissioner's office, it will be tens of thousands in fines and penalties, plus what we owe in labor. Please advise immediately." The director responds back within a few minutes. "This does not comply with company policy. Only DM and above should be on these calls, unless specified, and you will be given advance notice. I will discuss the issue with him personally." Shortly after, I receive a call from the director asking what the deal is, and telling me to tabulate all of the overtime and penalty hours everyone is owed, and that it will be included in our weekly checks. Our labor ended up being close to 150% of what it is normally. Obviously, the staff was pumped. DM hung around for a few months after, but ultimately got let go for being a shitbag. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to the Revenge's Ice Cream Archives, Episode 6. And thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories. I guess I inadvertently, just coincidental timing, decided I was doing some spring cleaning this year. I've been tidying out one of the spare rooms. You may have heard me mention I was getting an office set up finally after 6 years of doing this full time. Just 6 years, that's all it took me to get the motivation. And it's not going to be expensive to do, thankfully. It's just a matter of cleaning up and moving things and throwing other things out. So I made a good start on that yesterday. Broke down a lot of cardboard boxes, some of which I had to keep because, if you buy something expensive, you keep the box for a little bit before you throw it out. And it was time for them to go. Others, I just didn't have room in the bin at the time. But now I did, so yay me. So much cardboard. Anyway, I guess the point is, I shouldn't have put it off for so long, but it's happening now, so yay me. Okay, it's a busy day for me. I've got other work-related things to do, so I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.